Writing is an act of self-belief, and just believe you have something worth saying. There's always going to be so many books, so many people, so many things, so much art. It's the process of believing in yourself and bringing something to fruition that's on your heart that matters the most. Let all the publishing and all of that worry go away and just believe in yourself, because that's where confidence really comes from, is doing it for you first.
Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast. My name is Savannah Gilbo, and I'm here to help you write a story that works. I want to prove to you that writing a novel doesn't have to be overwhelming. So each week, I'll bring you a brand new episode with simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies that you can implement in your writing right away. So whether you're brand new to writing or more of a seasoned author looking to improve your craft, this podcast is for you. So pick up a pen and let's get started. In today's episode, I sat down for a conversation with one of the most inspirational people I know, Jamie Varon. And in our conversation, Jamie shares so many nuggets of wisdom about things like how she handles feedback, especially when it's critical feedback. She shares how she looks at writing like a business, not a hobby, and also the importance of celebrating milestones, no matter how big or small. You're also going to hear Jamie talk about what it was like to hear some really tough feedback from her literary agent and how this feedback led Jamie to seek representation elsewhere. Spoiler alert, Jamie went on to land her dream agent, so this story has a happy ending, don't worry. Jamie also shares her experience on what it was like to work with different industry professionals, from a book coach to an agent to an editor at a publishing house, and even what it's like working with a screenwriter who's turning one of her books into a movie. Yes, one of Jamie's books is being turned into a movie, and it's super, super exciting. We didn't dive too deep into that, but if you're like me, you're going to absolutely love hearing about her experience with that so far. So this is a jam-packed episode with my lovely and inspiring friend, Jamie Varon, and I'm so excited to share her story with you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the episode. Hi, Jamie. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Excited to get started and talk about all the good things.
Sure. And you have a really fun story, and I wanted to have you on the show today because I think you're a great example of what's possible for writers, and you're so good at sharing, the highs and lows of writing and life, like very publicly on your Instagram, which I just adore you for. And I know you're going to inspire so many people by sharing your story. So thank you again for being here.
Of course. I love talking about the real stuff. I'm like, we need to be talking about it more. So this is what I love doing. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to talk about the real stuff more, even if it's messy. That's how we're all going to get to a better place, right?
Exactly.
So let's start at the very top. Can you tell people who you are, what you're all about, what kind of books you write and things like that?
Yeah, I write all sorts of things, and I'm kind of a multi-hyphenate. I have a memoir / self-help book that was published last year called Radically Content. That has a journal companion now that was published in April. And then I have a novel, which is more like women's book club fiction, coming out in the fall. And now I'm, kind of switching to mostly focusing on novels, but I still write basically on Instagram, I write reminders to myself about just how to human and how to exist and how we just navigate life. And I don't have it all figured out. I just write those things to remind myself. I'm like, remember this lesson that you learned that you're going to forget in 2 weeks, and you gotta get it in. Right. Yeah. And then you'll come back and be like, oh yeah, I already had the answer to this. Cool. Yes. So that's what I do. I also have a course called Live with Intention, which is essentially my signature course of when people ask me, how do you do all the things that you do? I'm like, this is my process. This is how I do it. I went from being a very inconsistent start and stop type of person to now I finish things, which is really lovely. And I keep my promises to myself. And so, I do a lot of things. I used to be a designer. I still do that for, some select clients, and have built websites. Whatever my little soul says to check out, I do it.
That's awesome.
So that's where I'm at. I'm very creative and artistic.
Yeah. So multi-hyphenate indeed, right?
Yes.
We're going to talk about all of that, but we're mainly going to focus on your novel, which is called Main Character Energy, correct?
Yes.
And that's an awesome title. I know when we were working on it together, we just called it Poppy and Oliver's story, right?
Yeah. Well, because it's so character driven, I called it Poppy for a long time because that's the name of the main character. Because I was just like, this is her story. And then, funny enough, I thought of the title Main Character Energy because I was like, oh, I made Poppy the main character, like for real. And women like her don't usually get to be the main character. So that's kind of so yes, it's called Main Character Energy. But when we first started working on it, it was very much, we didn't even know where it was going, which I love. And it has changed so much since then.
It has and it hasn't. And that was one of my notes I wrote that we'll get into a little later, that it kind of feels like the original story you started, but there have been things that change through the process.
Yeah,
but it is funny. Yeah, it is funny because main character energy, that's kind of what Poppy's learning throughout the story, is how to step into that. So it's the perfect title. But okay, so let me give listeners a highlight reel of kind of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll dig into when we first met. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so Jamie and I met in August of 2020, and we started working together on her novel, Main Character Energy. And we really put her idea through the ringer. In less than a month, she went from having nothing but an idea to having a fully fleshed out and pressure tested outline. And we'll talk about this, but we were pretty tough on that outline because we really wanted to make sure it was solid before Jamie started writing. And spoiler alert, our hard work did pay off because she was ready to go off and write her first draft on her own. So then by the end of that year in November, which was about 3 to 4 months later, Jamie had a finished first draft, which is amazing, right? And we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what editing looked like and how she knew it was time to start querying agents and things like that. And then in April 2022, her memoir/self-help book called Radically Content came out. And if you haven't read that, it's a very fantastic, very inspirational book. So I highly recommend grabbing a copy. And then fast forward to a year later, which is April 2023, and the companion journal for Radically Content is officially out. And I'm so excited to get mine on Thursday because not only is the cover of the journal just beautiful, but I also really love the book Radically Content. And then finally, in September of this year, 2023, Jamie's novel Main Character Energy will officially be out in the world and ready to purchase. So that's pretty dang exciting, right? If we just look at the timeline from 2020 to 2023, Main Character Energy will make the third book that Jamie has published. So again, very exciting. Now, I want to quickly read the back cover copy of Main Character Energy for my listeners, and then we'll dig into the details about your journey.
Sounds great.
So here we go. Poppy Banks would rather be writing mysteries than listicles for her dead-end job at ThoughtBuzz. But after a series of rejections, she's ready to give up all her big aspirations and settle like her mom encourages her to do. The only person not ready to give up on Poppy's dreams is her Aunt Margot, whom she has secret lunches with each year. But everything changes when her beloved Aunt Margot dies, and her last request is to have Poppy travel to her villa in the French Riviera. There she'll discover her aunt has laid out an intricate plot that Poppy can inherit her palatial estate and continue to host the prestigious writer's residency, The Colony, that her Aunt Margot founded if she finishes a draft of her novel within 6 months. Uncertain she can live up to her Aunt Margot's expectations and her own, she turns to her aunt's journals for solace. The brooding Oliver, who thought he was being groomed to take over the colony, is none too pleased that Margot left her legacy to Poppy. And two tech bros would love nothing more than to buy the colony from Poppy and turn it into a literary spa. Poppy has 6 months to decide what to do about the villa and discover if she has the courage to be the main character in her own fantastic life. So that is so cool. And oh my gosh, I just got goosebumps reading that because it is so similar to the version of Poppy and her story that I first met. And I just think it's so cool when I see a published book that so closely resembles the author's initial idea. Okay, so Jamie, let's time travel all the way back to 2020. I know it's going to be probably hard because that's 3 years ago now. But how did you know this book needed to be written, and how did you finally decide to commit to writing it?
Yeah, so I would even time travel a little further back because I feel like we don't talk about this enough as authors, where I did write a different novel before that, and it was not where it needed to be, which is how I found myself with you. Because that was sort of, I look at it now as like, that was my tester. Like, do I even like writing novels?
Right.
Is this something I care about? And it, when I got my notes back from my agent and like looked through it myself, because I did have an agent at that time, I was like, this isn't where I don't want to work on this book, but I do want to get better at writing novels, And so that's how I came to you and I remember some of our first calls, I was just like, I don't want to know how to write one book. I want to know how to write several books. So I want a system. I want something that I want to understand the structure of story. And, I had read some of the structure books like Save the Cat and things like that. But it's very different when you start applying it because all that is very theoretical until you actually have things to put in there. And for this story, I'm of the Elizabeth Gilbert big magic belief that ideas are like sent to you as little, like you're the one that's supposed to do it. And so when I get an idea, I'm so glad that I read that book because I didn't think of ideas that way before. And I used to really battle with myself. But now when I get an idea, and especially at that time, it was a very fertile time for me where I was like, I've been given this idea for a reason. And I would say by the time that I got to you, there was a lot of the details to work out, but I kind of had the whole thing in my head of like where it's going, where it was going to start, how it was going to end and things like that. And so I felt like any idea for me, I know when I have a good idea is when I keep getting more ideas. Like, oh, it could be, especially. So if I say it specifically about a novel, because I've written several drafts and several things since then, if I start getting ideas for scenes like, oh, they could go there and they could do this and then this could happen and this could happen. I'm like, oh, that's an idea rather than this is just a good high concept plot that is not going to go anywhere. Because like there's a real big difference between there's plenty of things that I've gotten like, oh, that would be cool. And then I'm like, where would it even go? What's the conflict? If you start out with a perfect person that you love, like this perfect character that doesn't do anything. So that was like really big for me in knowing that there was something to explore there. And I think also knowing that it was like, I really wanted to be a good novelist. Like I wanted to work at it and I wanted to practice at it because of that first practice novel that, I think rejection will really show you whether you want something or not, because sometimes you get rejected. You're like, all right, I'm done. Thanks. Thanks for that. Like this isn't for me. And then other times you get rejected and you're like, wait a second, I want to get really good at this and make you through the day. Reject me.
And that's kind of the energy you came with. Cause I remember you were very clear, like, I want a system because I know I'm going to write more. So kind of help me take this idea, show me a system, and then kind of show me how efficiently I can do this. Right.
Yeah. I didn't know that I could write that fast. And, and I think some people are different. I like to do a quick and dirty draft, like write it out. And then, because I do like the editing process. And I think that that's a really beautiful way of like shaping a story. But for me, the way my brain works, it's so fast. Like I need to just get it out.
Capture it.
And I spent a lot of time in my 20s and even into my, early 30s not writing. I was very inconsistent. There was a lot of starts and stops with my writing. And so really, I came to you as like, I just need to know how to get words onto the paper, like I need to understand how to take my ideas and actually, and like part of it too was I liked showing you my things, like I liked sending it to you because that was really fun for me. I kind of thrive on feedback. So that was a big part of working with you and getting that out into the world or like getting it out of my head. Cause that was really, to have a dream where like, I want to write books, but then I cannot consistently write. It was like painful for me. Not know how to show up and do this with joy and excitement and all of that. And now I feel like I'm in a totally different place. Like I don't even question whether I can action on a new idea. I just know I can.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And That's a dream, I think, for so many people. And I think you've said some really important things so far. Like one of them is if you do get rejected or if you find out your story doesn't work, don't give up. That's if you really want to be a writer, don't give up. It sometimes just takes a little elbow grease and digging in and figuring out why something doesn't work, to make it successful. But the other thing I think that you said too is like, it's really hard sometimes if we don't know how to write novels, which like 99% of us don't, right? We don't get taught that in school. How are we expecting ourselves to sit down and write a story that works if we don't have a framework or a process, right?
Exactly. And at least to have a sense of how it all fits together. And, it's like I could always write a first page,
right?
I was like killing it on first pages. And then it was like, wait a second, how do you get through once you're like at 40%? That's
right.
when you really start going, oh my God, this is a long thing that I'm doing.
And then you question yourself and you think it's you that's the problem.
Yeah. And then, just learning a lot of how to keep going. For me, it became way less about, if you sit down and you're like, okay, you got a blank page, you got a title, maybe it says working title up there and you have a novel by your name. And then you sit down and you're like, I got to write a #1 New York Times bestseller right now. Like, all right, good luck. You will spend, like me, a decade not writing anything. Like, you can't.
That's a tall order.
It's a tall order, but we do that to ourselves, like we really do. And so I think that was the big part of, working with you and where it was part of working with you, but also where I was before that, which was like what I said of, I want to do this. Like, I want to write multiple books. I don't just want to write one thing. And that was something that I was really focused on because I had spent a lot of time sitting down and being like, how am I going to write the next great American novel?
Right.
In one day.
Right.
It's like, okay, I need to just figure out how to write anything.
Right.
Get anything down.
Just a piece of something to start.
Right.
I think you're right about, we can't have these expectations of looking at a published book. Because I used to do this too, where I'd look at my favorite published books and be like, I can't believe this person made this and mine is so bad in comparison, But we have to think about how many iterations that published book has gone through and how much help has been going on behind the scenes. It's a very different thing. It's like apples and oranges.
I now know that,
Right.
And what sucks is when like you haven't published a book yet, you don't know what published authors know, which is it's going to go through so many iterations and it's okay. Like it's okay to let it be shaped. It's okay that it's not going to be perfect right away. I finally got to the point where I was like, there's actually nothing to shape if you write nothing. So you have to write something and then work at it. And, I think some people maybe by like book 10, they're writing maybe cleaner drafts. I don't know, but we're not at that point yet. So to have the expectation that your book is going to read exactly like your favorite published novels, it's, you can't have that. Like something that really changed is I think I listened to this, I believe as I was writing Main Character Energy for the first draft, I listened to this podcast from the editor who acquired Where the Crawdads Sing. And she talked about how, of course, there was a lot of potential in the book. It got rejected a bunch. It wasn't some big auction, some splashy thing.
Right.
And what they ended up doing with the book was it was completely different. Like I don't really remember the book because I read it so long ago. Yeah. But essentially what we saw as the finished draft was absolutely gutted from in editing. Like they changed the whole thing, like something with the like lawyer or the law, the courtroom stuff was like totally changed. I mean, and when you think about it, it's like that requires so much work on the part of the author, and of course it paid off. That's a really successful book. Right. But even that, it's not like the finished version we saw is the one that
she submitted.
That she submitted. Right. It wasn't even the one she submitted to her agent. And then that's going to be changed by your agent even.
Right.
So there's just so much that goes into it that keeping that in mind, you can't have that pressure. But I really do think that pressure is what causes the writer's block.
Right. And two things I want to say about that. So, because I'm just tapping into the listeners when they hear this. they might get nervous, like, oh my gosh, if I submit to an agent or an editor or whatever, then they're going to change my book. And they do it for many reasons, right? It could be like the market, it could be to make your story better. But sometimes it's like, okay, what's your vision and how can we help you make it that, right? So it's not always, I don't want anyone to worry hearing that, thinking like, oh my God, they're going to take it over and make it something different.
Well, yeah. And that's part of the process. I mean, if you do end up getting an offer for an agent or an editor, you want to make sure that they're not going to make it unrecognizable.
Right.
You know, this is getting a little ahead of it, but I got some feedback from my novel when we were on submission with editors. And there was one that it was one of those really big publishing houses, a very respected imprint, but the way that she wanted the story to go, how she wanted me to, like what elements she wanted me to turn up and which ones she wanted me to turn down. I was like, that's not the story I'm telling. So It's not a fit for me. And I'm not going to focus on, doing a revision for that person. So you have to know where you're going to be flexible and where you need to stick to your guns too.
Right.
And I've done that. Like there was something in the editing for main character energy when I was finally working with my editor at HarperCollins that in theory, it sounded like a really good thing to add. But as I started working on the draft, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to add actually.
Right.
And I had to tell my editor, this doesn't make sense. I didn't add this in. And I had to really stick to myself with that. So, that's why it's good to really sometimes, we want things to happen so fast, but actually like knowing ourselves and feeling really confident in our draft and, as confident as you can feel, but feeling really good about it is very important because there will be times where you have to say, no, I'm not willing to change this. No, I'm not going to take a deal with somebody, especially when you get to the agent part. If they have ideas that you don't resonate with, that's not going to be a great agent for you,
Right.
It's not because their ideas are bad. It's just you're not vibing on the same level. So there's a lot of
fit.
Yeah. And so I think, you're right. People do get kind of worried that like the train's going to start moving. And then they're like, oh no, it's like you have to agree to those changes too. And often I will say that I was really worried about the editing process because I need creative control so much, but actually being able to lean on someone to give fresh eyes where like at this point, I've read main character energy probably 25 times.
Right.
Fresh eyes. I'm like, I know this story so like, I don't know it's hard to edit it at that point.
Right.
So it's like, you got to rely on someone whose taste you trust to tell you what needs to shift.
Right. And how was that when you pushed back and said, like, this doesn't feel organic to the story that I want to tell? What happened?
She agreed and she was fine. That was really important to me. I think my age, like, it's so funny because as much as I wanted to be a published author at like 21 years old and be, I wanted all that. Right. But now I see the wisdom in having had some time to know myself because that wasn't like a worry for me because back in the initial conversation before I signed the deal, when we were getting to know each other, that was something that I wanted to make sure was going to be, that there was a mutual respect and it wasn't, me just taking orders from an editor, that it was like, we're both going to, say, I respect your opinions, you respect mine. We both have a mutual goal. We want to make this book as the best that it could be.
Right.
Make this story like so beautiful. But if certain things don't fit and they don't work, then we have to be able to tell that to each other. And, I don't think that if I had done this when I was younger and maybe more insecure and not as, I guess, convicted about what I want and how I want certain things to go, I probably would have just forced it.
Right. And I think a lot of writers get in that position because they're afraid and they're like, if I don't do it, they're going to drop me. Or if I don't make this change, they're not going to even be interested in my book. So I think it is really important to, like you said, know what you're willing to work with and know what you want to hold firm on.
Yeah. And I'll say the publishing industry is tough. It's not for the faint of heart. And it sucks because the best writers are the faint of heart, like the sensitive souls. It's like, oh man, like we really, it's a hard business. So, you really do have to know yourself and know when to be flexible, when to hold your ground, and when to like say, okay, I'm being like stubborn and there's something bigger that needs to come through. It's tricky. It's really hard. I wouldn't say that it's not, because you feel a lot of pressure. There's a lot of anxiety. And then, like I said, I mean, the thing that's always going to be hard is once you write the book, you can never read it the way that a reader does, because you know it. So it's impossible to know how someone who's just reading it for the first time, picking it up, starting at the first page, is going to feel and interpret and experience your story, which I have found personally the most challenging thing, because I'm like, how do I know? Are they going to get what I'm saying? Is it too much feelings? Is it not enough? Are they going to, is it enough show and it'll not enough tell? It's like, oh my God.
And I think that's what you said earlier. It's so important to find the right fit, because once you trust somebody, whether it's a book coach, an editor, an agent, whatever it is, you have that trust where okay, they get my vision. I like their style. We're on the same plane, right? And then it becomes kind of this, let's just make it the best it can be together,
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the ideal situation, right?
Yeah. And like, I mean, I will say that working with you was such a good kind of tester for taking feedback, being able to hear ideas that weren't my own and incorporate those. And, I loved that process of being so collaborative. And, something that you are just so good at is you really honor the story that the author is trying to tell, instead of trying to make it. I mean, not that I would ever think that a book coach would try to make it what they want it to be, but I don't know. Sometimes, even as a designer, I always had to honor what the person was building for themselves. I couldn't, it wasn't, I think this is cool, so you should live with it. It's like, no, I have. So I felt like you were really good at that, of being like, okay, I'm offering ideas, I'm offering feedback, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this is still your story that you're telling.
Right. And I think you said the key word, it's a collaboration, right? And I think sometimes, if you're in a situation where, I'm talking to the listeners now, if you're in a situation where you feel like a book coach or an editor or whatever is trying to get you to go in a way you don't want, it's just possible they're misinterpreting what you want to. So, sometimes communication is key, because I think a lot of editors and book coaches, they want to help, but if they're misinterpreting something, then it makes sense that that two-way street of feedback would be a little bit off.
Absolutely. And also, everyone's human. I don't know. I kind of forget that. And everyone, I mean, something that I always thought about with like rejections and agents and editors and all the submission processes that you have to go through is like, it has to line up on so many levels. Like that person has to be like in a mood for that book. Like I've read books where I was just not in the mood for it. So I didn't appreciate it. And then I read it again and I'm like, wow, this is actually really good. What was I thinking?
Right.
So everyone's human. And I do think that like for some reason, as opposed to other artistic endeavors, writers tend to be not as forthright as they need to be and a little bit more timid than I would say. Like my brother's a producer, a music producer. And everyone in the music industry, they're not timid. Obviously, they're like going to be performing on huge stages. So they bring that into sessions where there's not this like, yeah, whatever you think. Like it's more like they need to be collaborating. And I just like would encourage listeners to be aware that even though the process is kind of daunting and there is rejection, like you still have something that is a product and is valued. And I think like we have to know our value even without an agent or a publisher saying it yet.
Right.
And that's how you kind of can move through it. Because otherwise, if you're like waiting for someone to tell you that, yeah, your book is good.
Right.
Like,
yeah, you could be waiting a long time and it might not even be something to do with your story. Like you said, it could be an agent doesn't have a spot on their roster. It could be a mood thing. It could be a market thing. I mean, because I've seen this happen before where it's like a story is great. And this kind of happened with you in a way too, where it's like we felt really confident about your story, and not to get too far ahead, but the first agent you brought this to didn't want to represent it.
yeah, that was a blow because it was actually my agent at the time.
Right.
So for your own agent to reject your story, I was like, huh, okay.
Yeah.
And
What's
that's
wrong with it?
yeah. And like she even said, she was like, I can't even give you notes on this because it needs so much work. And I was like, not sure that I agree.
Right. And we didn't agree. I remember we
No,
talked about it and we were flabbergasted because both of us were like, we love this story. We think it's in great shape. And to get that feedback was really hard.
it was so hard. I mean, I was so upset. And so that was a perfect example of I had to sit there with myself and go, okay, am I going to believe her or am I going to believe myself? And then I started doing a little digging and I was kind of paying attention to, because like when I got my agent in 2019, that agent at the time, it was for my nonfiction work. So we hadn't really discussed novels yet. And I started to look at her previous clients and her current clients. And I was like, we don't have a genre overlap because that's a big thing. I mean, you talk about genre a lot. And in the publishing world, I know people don't love it. I know writers don't love it because it's like, don't put me in a box. But like genre is vitally important. Like a reason you could be getting constant rejections is because your book might not fit into a genre. And that's impossible in the publishing industry because everything is based on if you like this, you'll like this. And you can't do that if you're not fitting into a genre. So, you know, I was looking at my agent at the time and her roster, and I was like, these books are not what I'm writing. And so I don't think this is a matter of my book's not good enough. It's more her taste. And I gave her a chance to kind of tell me that.
Yeah.
And she didn't, which I thought was like, that's not the kind of agent I want. I want an agent who can say, you know, this might not be my taste.
Right.
And instead of, no, my taste is the only taste that matters. And I was like, okay. So I ended up leaving her and breaking off the engagement. And it was a really good move because I didn't change a single thing about the book at all. I did not edit it at all. And I submitted it to like 3 agencies that I thought, these are all the books that I love. And there was one in particular that I went to their website like every single day just to look at the books on their roster, Root Literary. I was like, oh my God, Emily Henry and like Jasmine Guillory and like all these people. And I was just like, this looks amazing.
Those are your people.
Yeah, these are my people. I don't like write dark, twisty, like super heady thrillers yet. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, who knows? And I have a long life out of me. So yeah, I mean, and then I ended up signing with an agent from Root, and that's like a very good story, obviously. But I'm like, okay, I might not have gotten 100 rejections to my novel from agents, but like I got rejected constantly for like 2 years. And then to have suffered through a rejection from my own agent at the time, I was like, I deserve this.
That's right. You do. And I think that carries a lot of weight if we're like comparing getting, let's say 100 rejections. I think getting rejected from your agent feels just as darn heavy as that. So it's not maybe a little worse, right?
Right. I'm like, it's like getting rejected by like a parent. You're like,
I was
you're
going to say your
supposed
mom.
to love me.
You're
supposed, I mean, you know, if you have that kind of mom, but like, I was like, you're supposed to like this. This is your job to like this. And for me, as someone who has struggled with self-doubt, for me to leave that agent and say, no, I believe in this book too much. And this is not about my skill or this book. This is about us not being a fit. And to turn around and, you know, I was ready to. The reason that I only sent the book to like 3 agencies wasn't really because I had this belief that I was going to get signed with any of them. It was more like I just needed to get it out there and like for myself, show myself that I believe in it. I didn't think any of them were going to sign with me, especially Root Literary. But they say, they're like, we get thousands of requests. And I was like, oh man, they're not.
You're like, here's 1001.
Yeah. I'm like, here's another one on the file. Good luck, you know, and it took a long time. I waited months to hear anything. And it was more like, because at that time, that's when I got my book deal for Radically Content. So I was like, I guess I'll just focus on this. And if the novel is meant to be, it'll be.
Right.
And, I kind of just sent it to those first 3 agencies as like, let's just see. And then if I really feel compelled, like if I get rejected and I feel compelled to edit the book or something, I'll do that. But for now, I'm just going to focus on Radically Content. And I think that was good for me to have something else to focus on.
Yeah. And I remember we talked about it too, because like I said, we were so flabbergasted by I can't even give you feedback on this story. And we were like, what? We love this story. And we talked about, let's just put it out there and see what happens, because either we're going to get the same feedback or we're going to get something completely different. And that'll kind of, validate what we both felt about it. Right. So, I mean, I think that's really brave. And I know actually other writers who right now are probably listening to this episode where they're with their current agent and it's not quite working and they feel the gut feeling already, but they won't walk away. So I'm just curious if you had any words of wisdom for them.
I mean, you know what everyone told me? Oh, it's so hard to get an agent. You better keep an agent. Da, da, da. And I was like, I'm not going to think that way.
Right.
Sorry. That's essentially like saying to someone, settle in your relationship, in your unhappy relationship, because it's really hard to date.
Right.
So stay with that person forever and be miserable. Great.
Right.
Thanks. I'm just not a person that will give in to that fear, because for me, and this is kind of woo woo, but I think there's you got to have certain beliefs in what you're doing. And I was like, I'm not going to go through my career being afraid to move on from something that's not working just because it might be hard to find the next thing, because you look down the line and you're like, this is not going to get better. And I gave it a shot to get better. I had a writer friend at the time, published author, and I loved her book. And she just generously gave me a couple hours of her time to talk through all this. And she was just like, at least try, express how you're feeling, because we don't always express how we're feeling because we're scared that they're going to retaliate or something.
Right.
So I was like, I'm going to put it all on the line. And then I walked away from that conversation feeling like she said all the right things, but I didn't feel that I was supported.
Right.
And I was like, well, then that's it. And I also, I had the benefit too of having a friend at the time that I was talking to a lot who worked in children's book publishing, but she knew a lot of people in publishing. And she had told me so many stories of people who leave their agent of 5-6 years where they were just languishing, doing nothing, and then get someone new and all the things happen.
Right.
And that was a very common story. And so, I wouldn't say every time you should leave, but if it's really not working, a lot of times we take it on as it's us. We did something wrong, but really that's kind of their job, and they have to be able to at least explain why something's not getting picked up or why things aren't moving the way that you want them to. And if they can't, and they're not going to take any kind of responsibility over that, it's well, then we're not actually collaborating, because that's kind of how I felt. I was doing everything wrong. My book proposal wasn't good enough. And that's why it wasn't, happening in this. And then I finally was just like, no, I just think this is not a good fit. And it wasn't bad feelings. I was just
it's just, that's the reality, right? And that's so important, that it has to be the right fit, has to feel like a collaboration. And I think the most important thing, because a lot of the writers who are in a similar situation that I talk to, they know something in their gut. It's just the fear that's keeping them from going one way or the other.
Of course. And it is scary. I'm not going to say that it isn't, because, you go, well, it's going to get delayed and this, but it's already getting delayed. And if, you got to think a year from now, if I didn't make a change and I'm still in the same position and still feeling this way with my agent, am I going to be happy about that? Is my future self going to be happy about that? Or are they going to go, you know what? A year ago, I wish you would have left and tried something else and gone after someone else. Also, the thing is that I don't know, sometimes, we grow and we change and things change. And all of a sudden, what someone seemed like a good fit 2 or 3 years ago don't anymore. And this is honestly something that I feel like almost every author has a story of they had multiple agents. I did. I went to 2 agents. I had an agent in 2016 too. That it didn't, that was kind of my own thing, but it didn't go, we weren't meshing on ideas. And then, so it just, people don't want to talk about it, because they feel like it looks bad. But
Well,
I think it looks good.
yeah. And or it's like, I should just be grateful for whatever I get, but that's not really the best way to go about things. I mean,
Yeah,
yes, be grateful,
exactly.
but don't sit in because you think you don't deserve better.
Exactly. Like, of course, if you feel there's a difference between
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm expecting too much and I need to be grateful that I have this person on my team versus they're not really meeting my expectations and I'm too scared to say anything. And, I just think like you have to be willing to maybe have some hard conversations. Like, I especially think a lot of women look at their writing as sort of like a hobby. And it's like, it's not a hobby. Like, I look at it as a business. Like,
Right.
I'm in the business. Otherwise, I just write for myself. So I have to treat it like a business. And I'm
Yeah.
like, so then you're my agent business wise.
Right.
Like I got to look at that differently and I got to kind of step up to that energy versus this is just my little hobby. And I don't know, like, I mean, I'm not spending this much time on a hobby. Let me tell you.
Right. And I think it's a good point too, because you know that the people on the other side of the fence, whether it's an agent or an editor or whatever, they're coming at it from a business angle. So it makes sense that we would as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like something empowering in that. And, and it is tricky when you're turning like your passion and something you love into a business. So it's something to think about and hope that it doesn't change that for you. But, that's how I looked at it. That's how I was able to craft like a really good query letter when I sent those to those 3 agencies. Like, cause I was like, this is a marketing document, that I know, that I understand of like, this book has a brand. This book has a personality, has an energy. So I need to bring that, I used like some templates for the query letter, but I really kind of went out of the box and did something different to just grab I'm like, okay, so there's 1,000 requests in an inbox somewhere. How do I stand out? And instead of going, oh no, how am I going to stand out? I'm like, how am I going to stand out? Like,
Challenge accepted.
Right. Yeah. Like, I got to challenge myself. I got to figure this out. And I know that can be tricky if someone doesn't, I have the benefit of having my own business. I was in branding. I'm a branding expert. So, I know that I have some things that are helpful in that regard, but just changing the thinking on it. The same way you can change the thinking on like genre. I started to get really interested about genre. I was like, cool. That makes it easier for people to know what to read.
Right. It's like a language, right?
Right. It's like, okay, if you like romance books, you're going to like this. Or if you like women's fiction, you're going to like this. But if you try to, reinvent something that doesn't need to be reinvented, then you're kind of like putting yourself back a little bit and not
creating confusion.
Yeah. Instead of looking at it like this is a business, my book, it needs to be viable. Like people, that's how they invest in you. Like a book advance is an investment into you. And these things can sometimes turn people off. But I think if you look at them differently, you're like, this is empowering knowledge to know.
Right.
I'm not at the mercy of just this like subjective artist. It's like, well, or I can, make sure that I have really solid comps with what I'm working with. I can make sure that I'm, marketing myself and doing what I can to really make this an easy yes for agents and editors and all of that.
Right. And I think actually that's a great point, is thinking of how do I make this an easy yes versus going at it from a place of fear and like, I'm probably not going to stand out. This is so hard. This is awful. I love that you said that. Make it an easy yes. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
I'm stealing that.
I mean, that's like my philosophy on a lot of things. That's how I ran my business for so long. Like make it an easy yes on clients, make it easy for people to opt in and care about what you're doing. I don't think that that's like, I think people maybe think that's kind of selling out. And it's like, it's not selling out. It's just, there's a lot of noise. How do you cut through?
Helping you get what you want.
Right. It's the same way that like, of course, do we want people to judge a book by its cover? No, but there's also millions of books. So people need to have a way to discern between how are they going to choose one book from the other if all the books are just like a black cover, it's like all of those can be empowering parts of the process if we look at it that way, as opposed to looking at it through like a fear lens.
Right.
I just think like publishing, if you do look at everything with publishing through fear, it's going to be a real hard process. Cause like I wrote main character energy in August 2020. It's a 3 full years before it comes out. Like, I cannot be in fear for 3 years. Right. Like, that's not worth it to have my name on the cover of a book. I got to like
Have fun with it.
Yeah, have fun with it. And I really think that that's something you bring to the table a lot, because I do think there is a lot of fear of like, it's going to be so hard to write your book, and this and that. And like, you're just like, no, let's make it fun. Let's enjoy it. Because like, that's why we got into this. We all got into it because we're nerds and love reading and writing, and I say nerds in the most fond way, Like, we grew up reading books. That's probably what we did. Like, we read Babysitter's Club and Goosebumps and all those things. Right. Like, that's how we got into all this. So to bring the fun back and make all of this empowering, even as there's parts that are out of your control, there's a lot of waiting. There are hard points. I just think like, I'd rather figure out a way to make it enjoyable as much as I can versus always leaning towards, oh no, it's not going to work out, and fear and oh no, because like, you really can't control like some people. I mean, 2 perfect examples: Casey McQuiston, Red, White, and Royal Blue. First book takes off like a rocket, right? Okay. On the other side, you have Taylor Jenkins Reid, who she wrote 3 books that were very mid-list before 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo took off like a rocket. Even it was like 3 years after that book was even published. Like, that 7 Husbands did not get on the New York Times bestseller list until years later. It did not debut there. Right. And then, she's had Malibu Rising, Daisy Jones and the Six, Carrie Soto's Back. Like, but she had 3 books. So that's, you would say, years of time and energy before things really took off to all the adaptations and all of this. Like, now those books, one of them is being adapted from her, like the 3 books that she wrote first. But that's years later. And so you really can't say one way is better than the other. I mean, so I think like that's another thing of just knowing that it's an unpredictable industry, and there's many different paths to where you probably envision yourself going.
Right. And 2 things I want to say to that is one, I think what you said earlier about having fun and even like writing your query and your synopsis in kind of a different way. It's almost like, this is why I love having frameworks, whether it's genre or story structure or a query template, because those things, it's like a proven thing that will allow you to put your creativity and your fun into it. So that's, a lot of people think of things like story structure or genre as limiting and like it handcuffs their creativity. But I'm curious, did you feel any of that?
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all. In fact, I found it kind of like nice.
Yeah.
Because, well, first, I actually found it really nice because when we started talking about the difference between like a women's fiction book and romance, it was really clear to me that I didn't want to write a romance novel. Right. And I love romance novels, but it's not the story that I wanted to tell. So if I had tried to write a romance novel, it wouldn't have fit in romance. Like, that's not the editors that were going to take main character energy, because it's not a romance novel. And I found that really encouraging, because I was like, oh, there's actually some order to things. I like that, like romance has to go a certain way. And then this genre has to go a certain way, and it has to hit certain things. So it's not like Lawless Land and you have no idea what like things to hit. And as we see, there's a million different ways to go about it. I mean, I had like for my query letter, I hit the few things that you need to put in there, like you have to put the comps, you have to put the word count, things like that, the genre. But I weaved it in a really creative way. I mean, this is going to be your first impression to an agent. Right. You're a writer. It better be compelling, right? Right. If your query letter is not compelling, book's not compelling, like they're not going to be compelled. Well, it could be, but you're not going to get to that point because they need to be compelled in the first.
To read it.
Yeah, to read it. A lot of agencies, they only want the query letter. So you're not even able to see, they're not even going to see a different impression. They're just going to go off of that first impression. And so I found it encouraging to figure out a way to be creative within some sort of structure, because otherwise it's like, just be creative. And I was like,
Right. What does that mean?
what do I include? What do I do? There's like a million things to include then.
Right.
And instead having something more focused, and then you're like, oh, cool, I can like work around this. I can make it stand out and make it like really interesting because instead of having to feel limited by some like just some structure things or different points that you need to hit within genres.
Right. And I think some writers think that it's not going to be fun when they follow the framework, but I've found that people who embrace it actually have a lot of fun and then get further than with if they didn't embrace it.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to say too is you keep saying, okay, it's probably going to be a couple years, right? Realistically, I think for some people, what I teach on the podcast is like, we need to figure out what your why is, because if you don't know why it's worth going through all this effort and having the patience and getting rejected, it's going to be really hard to sustain that motivation. And I know this is probably an area of your expertise. Do you have any feedback on that or any thoughts?
Oh, I completely agree. And I think the why needs to be, this is something I teach in my course, that everything you do need the why, because you'll lose motivation, or just sheer willpower is not enough. And the why, I always frame it as like, it needs to be something positive that you're going towards, as opposed to sometimes we have whys that are like a negative, like, oh, I'll feel like a failure if I don't publish a book. It's like,
not very motivating.
Went. Yeah, it's like, God, ouch. You know, believe me, I've been there. So don't think I know. I only know this because I know it.
Yeah.
But, you know, the why has to be like, you're going towards something. Like, what am I looking forward to? And it could be small things. Like that's something that I've had to learn on the publishing journey, is like the big moments are really few and far between. So you have to look forward to like, oh, when I see the cover for the first time, the conversation with someone who like gets my vision and wants to talk about it. Like that is the most fun when someone
that's a win.
Yeah. Like when my agent now from Root came to me with like, we got on the phone and she was like, can I just tell you all the things I like about your book? I was like,
you're like, let me go get a cup of coffee. Sure.
Yeah. I'm like, can I record?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like things like that where you're going towards something, you know, even like going towards things that, you know, don't even have to do with any kind of milestone moment. But yeah, you really do have to have, I mean, I wish I could tell you, oh, it's not going to take a couple years, but even if you got a book deal today, it would still take 18 to 24 months for the book to come out. That's just their publishing schedules in general. So I mean, I know it sucks because most writers feel like, I wish I was published yesterday, but we have to trust in the timing. We have to trust that it's all going to work out the way that it is. And having that why and having a couple, even a myriad of whys is really important, because it is very easy to lose motivation, especially when you face rejection, which you most likely will. But even that, like my why for rejection was positive. I was like, at least I'm in the game.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sitting on the sidelines anymore, watching other people publish books. I'm like, at least I did it, you know, like I did it.
Yeah. And there's something cool about having done it too, because even if you're getting rejections, that's still such a big, brave step in the right direction. You know, that's something a lot of people won't do.
Right. So and that keeps us from doing the things. And it's like, I think if you can get comfortable getting rejected and having things not go your way and even failing at things, it's like you're unstoppable. You can do whatever.
And on that note, I was going to ask you earlier because I know you said that you like getting feedback, and there are some authors that feedback is scary and it feels like I'm going to just hear all the things I'm doing wrong. So what are your thoughts, or how do you look at getting feedback?
Well, I think we all need to allow ourselves a tantrum from time to time. Of like, it does suck sometimes, especially if the feedback isn't glaringly positive. And there are things you're like, ooh, that stings. Oof.
Yeah.
But I look at it as it's serving the greater story, and it's not about me. And no one expected me to be perfect at this right away. And, you also have to, like we were talking about before, do you trust the person that is giving you feedback? I had something where I got like some really harsh notes from someone as a beta reader. And I was like, I'm not gonna take these on.
Yeah.
Like it sucked, but it was like, oh, this person was expecting a different book,
Right.
And a lot of these notes would take away from the heart of the story. Like I had a very specific purpose of what I wanted my book to be. There's so many ways you can go with a book, but I was like, I want to write a hopeful, uplifting book. So if you're expecting it to be like a really dark literary fiction, it's not going to be that,
Right.
So it's important to go through that a little bit. And then also recognize, I think once you actually implement the notes and get the feedback in, and you can really take it as not like a slight against you, and you see how much it really does reshape things and make things better, the next time the feedback is easier because you're like, okay, I see what we're doing here. And it's not really about getting it right away. That's I think like a really big block for people is trying to get it right.
Yes.
Right away. And it's like, no one is going to give you extra credit for that.
Well,
like,
and it's probably never going to happen.
Yeah. And it's not going to happen. So like, we don't have to have that expectation because we're not going to meet it. And I now find that really freeing.
Yeah.
And, because I'm now working on my option book. That's So, and I was talking to my agent and I was like, do I have to have it all figured out in the book? Because there was still some things, you write a draft and then you go, is that character supposed to have a sister? Do I need to kill her off?
Yeah.
What do I do? You create this idea in the beginning and then by like page 200, you're like, I don't know if I want her to even have a family,
Right.
You're like, there's so many things that you start thinking of.
Yeah.
And my agent was like, no, it's actually like really collaborative of shaping the story from the beginning. So it's better to have less fixed ideas. And I was like, oh, that sounds
like,
amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Instead of in the past, I would have been like, no, it needs to be perfect. And no one's expecting it to be perfect. So I'm like,
it's nice hearing that.
It is. It is. And, I think that's really refreshing. And once you get past that, I'm going to get rejected or I'm not a good enough writer. Because that's the other thing I really had to come to terms with. There is no good enough. There really isn't, because art is completely subjective. We have Colleen Hoover on every single list ever. And there are some people that truly do not like those books.
Right.
And they're not like highbrow National Book Award finalists. They're very genre fiction that people really can't put down. And so what's good? Is that a good book, or is the good book the one that wins the Pulitzer, or is it the one that, so the fact
super
that
subjective,
it's so subjective. And actually we need to look at that as like so freeing, because there's just the same way, like, how do you go into a museum and say like, this painting is better than this?
Right.
How? Who gets to decide? And I mean, sometimes I go into a modern art museum and I'm like, that's just blue on a canvas.
What is that?
I'm like, all right, someone gets this that I don't get, but cool, to each their own. In a museum, I guess. So, it's like, I think that's a really cool thing to recognize and be humbled by, that like this pursuit of good enough, it's like, who gets to decide? It's so subjective that's why we get so enamored with it, because there's no way to measure it. And then you just go, wait a second, actually, that can be really freeing to let that go.
Yeah. And just make art for yourself and write books for yourself, because, especially with a story like yours, it's going to find its people, and that's who you want to read it anyway. Right. So it's like, make it for you, make it for the people like you, and you've got a win-win.
Yeah. I mean, I love this quote. I don't know who said it, but I think it was a tweet, and someone was like, make sure you do write the story that you want to write, because you will read it like dozens of times. Yeah. And it's so true. There. Yeah. Like you have to do that. And I think, you have to really go based on like what you like to read. and what you love, and instead of what's like just popular right now,
Or what
and
you think you should be.
yeah, and what you think you should be. Because like I will say that that's like that's going to keep the motivation up. Whereas it's really easy to abandon something when you're just like, oh, well, I wrote this just to get a book deal. And then
Right.
it's like,
Yeah, 'cause your heart's probably not in it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so to back up for anybody who doesn't know what an option book is, can you explain that?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's with every publisher, but if you don't get some publishers don't do like multi-book deals. So like that's when they'll buy like your 2 of your books or 3 of your books, like your next books. A lot of publishers, they want you to give them the option to take your next book. And so they have like sometimes 30 days to decide on it. And you don't need to have like the full draft written. It's more like you have a pitch, first 3 chapters, and then like a synopsis, like a pretty, like intense synopsis. And then you go from there. And I mean, from what I understand, most publishers want to do the option. They like to stay with an author. And so, that's what my agent told me. So also, if your debut novel does well, and well is very relative, but like if it sells copies, then you're in a good place. And I find this process a little bit uncertain, but I'm just like trusting it,
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
okay. Because there's a lot of pros and cons to multi-book deals too. It seems very nice to have that kind of certainty, but it also means if one of your books does really well, you're still now in a deal from your debut time where they didn't know how it was going to perform yet.
Right.
And so there's kind of like good and bad things to each of those. Just the same way that like there's good and bad things to like the auctions and all the things. Yeah, any deal. Anything that looks like it's cut and dry, it's usually not.
Yeah. And it depends on your goals and what you want for your writing career and things like that.
One thing I'll say is, we really do kind of fixate on the advance, but it truly is an advance. And from what I understand with publishing, it's actually the worst thing that can happen. Like, not the worst thing, but like, it's a really not great thing that if you don't earn out your advance. So you don't sell enough copies to earn out your advance. Like that actually is the thing that'll affect your ability to publish more books.
Right.
So sometimes it is better to take like a lower advance and make sure that you earn out and then kind of build from there. Because I know we all love to like get on Publishers Marketplace and see what everyone's getting and go to the little key and see but it's sometimes a lot of pressure to have a big advance and then you have to earn it out and you don't always know, because then you have to earn out on top of it, like their costs, they apply those against your sales, like the cost to marketing and all of that. So it can start adding up quite a bit.
Right. And think about it from their perspective too, from a business angle. It's like, what looks better, right? Someone who got this giant advance that didn't earn out, or someone that got maybe a lower advance that did earn out and exceeded expectations. So I don't know. It's fun to think about things from the opposite point of view sometimes. But okay, so I had a question for you about Radically Content, because this was the book that was published last year. And this is your nonfiction memoir inspirational book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting a movie?
I mean, it's in the works. Yeah.
Is that something we can talk about?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's public. I've shared as many details as I can share, but yes, I have a producer who optioned it. We are working with a screenwriter. She's wonderful. She currently is a writer on Family Guy, so she's hilarious. And we are about a week out from receiving like the treatment, which is the outline for the script.
That's so fun.
Yeah. And then by summer, I think we should have like a first draft of the script. And yeah, it was a really cool process. I mean, I talk about knowing myself. I felt like I should have adapted it. Like, I had that thought. I'm like, should I be writing the script? And then I was just really honest with myself. And I was like, I'm just too close to it. I can't see myself as a character in a book, because it's like Radically Content is very much my story. So there's all of it, like a lot of it is being pulled. It's weird to be sitting in meetings of like, the character that's based on Jamie is going to be doing this. I'm like,
I feel like you're talking about me.
I'm like, me, that's me.
Yeah, that's so fun.
Yeah. And it's really exciting. I mean, it's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of in between times. Things take a long time. So I don't know when it'll hit the screen, but
so exciting.
It's really, really exciting.
Did you ever think this would get turned into a movie?
Oh, no. I thought I was like, the novel, that'd be really exciting. But I was like, who's going to make Radically Content into a movie? Like, that's wild. And then it's just the way that it has come together is really magical. And I'm just like, I guess we're making a movie. Like, it just is so seamless. And it really is that kind of feeling of like, let's just do it. Let's just see how it goes. Three women just working on it. And
I love it.
We want to keep it just us for now so that we don't get into those boardrooms where they start telling us, here's how we need it to go and here's how it should be. And so it's going really well. It's really fun. And I'm just like trusting the process completely because I'm not the one writing the script, which is actually really cool. Like I get to see
process and how it's done.
Exactly. And I get to have this screenwriter interpret it on her own. And, I have known her for a while and she read the book before I even like got in touch with her about this. And I was like, that's what I always wanted. Like if we were going to do this and hire someone, I wanted someone that was already a fan of the book and not someone that would have had to read it for like a job.
Yeah.
And so, she was already ready. She was already in it. And
that's awesome.
No, it's definitely like the dream, I will say, but it also, I will temper that with like, there's a lot of in between times, so it's a lot of patience, like so much patience. And I, for one, am working to get comfortable with a lot of patience in all of these things that I'm doing.
Yeah, it sounds like such a simple thing, but patience is very hard.
Yeah, the days feel really long when you're waiting on things to happen. Like we all know how it feels when we're waiting for that email. It's like, why is an hour feel like an entire day?
Right.
That's nuts.
Oh my gosh, I know. But it's such exciting stuff. So it's worth it, right?
It definitely is.
Well, I'm going to ask you one last question then.
Sure.
What's one piece of advice you would give to writers who are just starting out?
Believe you have something worth saying. Like, writing is an act of self-belief, and just believe you have something worth saying. There's always going to be so many books, so many people, so many things, so much art. But like, it's the process of believing in yourself and bringing something to fruition that's on your heart that matters the most. Like, let all the publishing and all of that worry go away and just believe in yourself, because that's like where confidence really comes from, is doing it for you first.
I love it. Okay, that's beautiful. And that's going to be a big takeaway. Believe in yourself, have confidence.
I think
that's the dream. But okay, well, it has been super fun kind of going down memory lane, talking about your journey. And I know all of this is going to inspire other people to take action and get their books written and put themselves out there. So thank you for sharing. And where can people go to find out more about you and your books and follow along on your journey?
I'm at Jamie Varon on like every social platform, jamievaron.com. I have all my stuff there. So plenty of stuff to look around, and, feel free to message me on Instagram and I'll shoot you a link to whatever you need to.
Perfect. Okay. And we'll link to all that in the show notes too. So thank you again, Jamie, for spending time with me. And I can't wait to see what's next on the list of things you're going to create. So good luck in all your endeavors. And we'll have to have you back someday for movie talk or main character energy release or something fun.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and for showing your support. If you want to check out any of the links I mentioned in this episode, you can find them in the show notes listed in the description of each episode inside your podcast player or at savannahgilbo.com/podcast. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're following this podcast because there's going to be another brand new episode coming out next week. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast that's worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help this podcast get in front of more fiction writers just like you. So if you have a quick second, please leave a rating and a review and share this podcast with some of your friends. And then I'll see you next week with a brand new episode full of actionable tips, tools, and strategies to help you become a better writer. So until then, happy writing.